Hi class, welcome to lesson number 33. We're again talking about macroeconomics, and we've covered a couple of things like aggregate demand, aggregate supply, what shifts aggregate supply. We're going to get into the graphing part of it and how we can shift AD and AS a little more in advance in this class. But before I do, as usual, we do our homework question, which was please state me the shifts in the short run for aggregate supply. And these are the four reasons. One, input prices. If the input prices go down, right, what tends to happen is that your AS shifts to the right because it's cheaper to make resources, right? And then you can supply more. So that's one. Two is tax policy. Let's say that taxes are helping you out. Let's say that if you're in the steel industry, steel taxes are down. Well, you can produce more with the same amount of money. Same theory, AS shifts to the right. Right is deregulation, sort of the same thing as tax policy. The regulation is kind of loosened. The firm has more sort of guidelines as to, on their own, they have more control basically as to how to manufacture steel, let's say in our example, right? And they get to make more profits and the AS shifts right. So they can basically produce the same amount, produce a little more actually for the same amount of money that they spend. Politics and environment obviously have effect. Let's say a disaster hits the steel plant is gone, AS shifts to the left. Politics can also help or hinder depending on what the event actually is. So these are the shifts for AS in the short run. Now we're getting off to a topic where we can understand how AD meets AS, right? So until now we've kind of discussed SRAS and AD in a sort of different way. I mean, they've been both in different graphs. We talked a little bit about how they come together, but in this class we're definitely going to bring them both together, and not only that, but understand how shifts work on these graphs. All right. So to start off, one simple concept I want to state is that macroeconomic equilibrium occurs when the quantity of real output demanded equals the quantity of real output supplied. All right, so this is the way it works, is that when you have a graph like this, right, and you have the price level on the y-axis, right, and the quantity, the real GDP on the x-axis, right, and you have an SRAS graph that looks like this. We've seen this before. And an AD that kind of looks like that, right? What they're saying is that the equilibrium point is what decides the price level, right? And our GDP, okay? So that's the basic consensus out of that. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about is the fact that when you have a recessionary gap, how do you explain it? What is a recessionary gap, first of all? A recessionary gap is when the economy is operating below the quantity of full employment, okay? And the economy is likely to have high unemployment. All right, so where does this happen, okay? Let me just erase this graph and show you guys the recessionary gap that I'm talking about. So let's have this again, this SRAS graph. It looks like that, right? And let's have this kind of, we've seen this before, the LRAS, right? LRAS, which operates at RGDP-F, which is full employment, okay? And let's say our AD is in the recession, which we said is zone 1, right? Zone 1 is right about here, the flat zone, right? AD comes right about here, right? And basically we're in a recession, low GDP, right? And the way we talk about a recessionary gap is we see the equilibrium right about here, okay, that price level and this RGDP. This RGDP, I'm going to call it RGDP-R, okay? And basically the difference between RGDP-F and RGDP-R is called as a recessionary gap. Okay? Hopefully everyone can get that. Now, the next, the opposite side of the spectrum is the inflationary gap that exists when the economy is operating at above GDP-F, all right? So let's say for some reason that my AD is over here, all right? And so my RGDP is down here, right? So the difference between this point and the RGDP-F, okay, this difference right here is known as an inflationary gap. Okay, so understand the difference between the full employment and RGDP-R, where there's a recession, there's a recessionary gap. Difference between RGDP-F and the RGDP at which I guess the inflationary point is the inflationary gap, okay? So one is operating above full employment, one is operating below recession, above full employment, above inflation, excuse me. Okay, so inflationary gap and recessionary gap is something that I hope right now graphically you can understand a little better. But that being said, let's talk about shifting AD, all right? So we did this a little bit before in a different class, but let's talk about shifts in AD, okay? All right, so shifts in AD. So you've got price level, right? And then you've got RGDP. Things don't change much there. You've seen all of this before, right? You've got the SRAS graph. We've seen that before, right? You've seen the LRAS graph. You've seen that before at full employment, right? Again, LRAS stands for long run aggregate supply. SRAS stands for short run aggregate supply. Okay, good. RGDP F, right? As in full employment. Okay, awesome. So what happens when we shift AD? So let's say that we're at a recession, all right, guys? 81, okay? And we're at this particular point, RGDPR. Okay, what happens in a recession? Remember, when you're in a recession, what does the government have to do? The government has to spend more money. Okay, when the government spends more money, what happens is that the government spending goes up. Okay, the government spending goes up, and what happens when government spending goes up? Well, the RGDP goes up, right? Because AD shifts to the right. Okay, so when G goes up, AD shifts to the right to AD2. Okay, two arrows always. Okay, and RGDP goes to from RGDP-R to RGDP-1. So the RGDP actually increases, right? While at the same time, because you're in the flat zone, the price level doesn't change too much. It does, maybe slightly, but it's not relevant as to how much the RGDP is changing, okay? So it's a win-win situation because, one, you're getting out of a recession, okay? You have high unemployment here. You're reducing the amount of unemployment as you move along this line here, right? So, and you're not having much inflation. The difference in price level is not that much. Okay, so 81 to 82, when the shift happens, the government is spending money, right? G goes up, okay, and the demand shifts right, it increases, okay? So now let's talk about moving in from, let's say, 82, right, to let's say 83 at full employment, okay? So government spends more money again, AD moves up again, RGDP moves, but this time, price levels actually increase, okay? Actually increase, well, last time though we shift 81 from 82, price levels didn't shift as much, but from 82 to 83, price levels definitely dramatically changed, okay? Now, this shift, all right, this shift that we saw from 82 to 83, okay, is known as demand pull inflation, okay? Demand pull inflation, okay? Well, why is this important? Because the way we can describe this is that as the aggregate demand has been moving here, price levels have gone up. Yes, the RGDP has gone up, but also the price levels have gone up, and that's why we can say that this is a demand pull inflation, okay? So you guys understand that, all right? Now, let's talk about how RGDP moves, let's say, for some reason, from 83 to 84. More government spending happens, and it moves. Now you've got to watch out because the price level increases almost exponentially, right? But the changes in RGDP is almost very, very small when compared to the price level, okay? So you're not getting much out of the RGDP, your output's not increasing more, but the price level is increasing by a lot, okay? And that is a big, big problem when it comes to economic health, all right? Because if price levels go up, you're making $5 a day. Tomorrow, the $5 is not going to be worth as much because the price levels have been increasing by a lot more. So definitely need to watch out when you move from 83, let's say, to 84. Anything above the full employment, you definitely need to watch out because you're in an area where inflation is going to increase exponentially. Okay? That being said, let's talk about the reverse spectrum. So we've talked about AD shifting right. Government spent a lot of money. whatnot. But let's say for some reason government taxes more, right? Government taxes more. Well, how does that shift AD? So, or let's say G goes down. Let's say government spending actually goes down. If G goes down, AD goes down, right? AD goes down. I hope people remember that. So if AD goes down, I'm going to shift the arrows here, right? Let's say, I'll erase the arrows here. And let's say that AD goes from 83 to 82, okay? Right, 83 to 82. Well, look what happens. Our GDP goes down, okay? Our GDP goes down. Price levels go down, okay? And overall, things are not looking that great because output has come down, okay? Yes, we've brought price levels down. So at 84, for example, it'd probably be a good thing to shift to 83 because look, we have increased the price levels exponentially. We need to battle price levels. Output's okay because when you shift from 84 to 83, our GDP doesn't change that much, okay? When you shift from 83 to 82, our GDP changes by a lot, right? So make sure that you understand that. Now, this idea of moving from down the 80, right, when you shift the 80 to the left is known as deflation, okay? Something opposite to inflation is deflation. So when 80 moves to the right, it's called as demand pull inflation. 80 moves to the left, it's called deflation, all right? Pretty important stuff, okay? So make sure you understand that. One last note to understand this before I move on to the AS shifts is that 80 shifts in zone 1 have the max amount of damage, okay? Or help, rather, any way you look at it. If you shift from 82 to 81, right, obviously your GDP reduces by a lot. But imagine 81 to 82, the multiplier effect is really good because price levels don't change as much, right? But our GDP changes by a lot. So zone 1, when you want to get out of a recession, you can use government spending and pull your 82, use demand pull inflation, move to the right, our GDP goes up, price levels don't change as much, win-win situation, all right? So understand that the multiplier effect is very, very good when it comes to zone 1, okay? And when it comes to zone 3, almost useless because what tends to happen is that price levels are changing by a lot and our GDP is not changing as much as before, okay? Now we get into AS shifts, all right? So how does AS shifting work? We talked about the reasons why AS shifts, right? But we didn't actually see it shift as much. Now, we've talked about the reasons. One of the reasons was input prices, right? So let's say input prices come down. Then AS goes up. And remember, this is considering that 80 is constant, okay? 80 is constant. Okay, as AS goes up, price levels go down, and then our GDP goes up, and unemployment goes down. Okay, so how do we show that graphically? Well, we have price level as usual, right? And then we have our GDP right here, okay? A downward sloping AD as you've seen before, okay? An SRAS that you've seen, right? An LRAS that you've seen before, okay? Now input prices shift temporarily, so SRAS shifts, parallel shifts, guys, from SRAS, let's call it 1 to SRAS 2, okay? SRAS is shifted, so watch what I said, right? I said that price levels have come down. This is my price level before. Now after, price levels have come down, right? My RGDP is actually increased, right? From here to here. And if those input prices change, is actually permanent, right? You have a new LRAS that looks something like that. All right? So make sure that you understand if it's temporary or permanent. If it's temporary, obviously stick to the fact of only shifting SRAS, don't shift LRAS. If it's permanent, then you know that you can shift. Remember the reasons why you can shift LRAS permanently, okay, is the availability of resources, technology, and productivity, right? As well as, let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Shifting AS, right, availability of resources, technology, and productivity, and policy incentives. Those are the long-run shifts. All right, so let's get down to business about shifting AS down, all right? So what happens if my AS actually temporarily prices go up? What happens if that happens? So this is the exact opposite scenario, right? if my input prices go up, right? Let's say they go up, okay, the exact opposite. AS actually goes down, price levels actually go up, RGDP goes down, and unemployment goes up. How do we show that? Well, let's say it goes from, again, from SRS1 to SRS2, right? It shifts that way. Okay, look, price levels have actually gone up this time. RGDP has gone to the left, which means it has reduced. And at the same time, understand that unemployment has increased. So bad news when it comes to SRS, okay? When going to the left. Going to the right, perfect scenario, okay? So this being said, let's talk about a new topic called supply shocks. All right, so what are supply shocks, okay? And what are they a result of? So supply shocks is when your SRAS, right, or basically your supply, right, moves. And why is it moving? There are different reasons. We've talked about the shifts before. That being said, let me make sure that we understand that supply shift is basically a generic name of causing, of naming, let me write it down as well. So supply shifts are any events that cause the AS to move, okay? Any events that cause the AS to move. Let's put it down in a formulaic way like we did before, in a flowchart way, excuse me. So if AD goes up, right, in general AD shifts, AD goes up, RGDP goes up, RGDP goes up, right? Generally unemployment goes down, and your price levels have gone up. Because see, when you shift your AD to the right, you see your price levels actually go up, okay? And obviously remember, if you're in the flat area, price levels don't go up as much, excuse me. AD goes down, it's the exact opposite, right, of this. Let's talk about AS. What if AS goes up? If AS goes up, we talked about the fact that your price levels go down, right? My price levels go down, and then my RGDP goes up. My RGDP goes up, my unemployment goes down, okay? That's something that you need to remember in terms of shifting. All right. The next big topic we're going to talk about is called the Phillips curve, okay? The Phillips curve kind of understands a relationship between two things. One is inflation and two is unemployment, okay? And both have an inverse relationship in the short run when it comes to Phillips curve. What does that all mean? We'll make sense of that in just a second. All right, so let's talk about the Phillips curve, okay? Phillips curve. Nothing to do with the company Phillips, has everything to do with the economist Phillips. So let's talk about the Phillips curve. All right, so Phillips curve actually kind of looks like your aggregate your aggregate demand. Why does it look like that? Well, it's downward sloping. So when it comes to the Phillips curve, you have the x-axis having to do with unemployment rate. Remember, it's to do with unemployment and inflation. So if unemployment rate goes on your x-axis, guess what? Inflation rate goes on your y, right? So inflation goes on your y-axis, inflation rate. This is a percent, this is a percent as well, okay? Both is a percent. Phillips curve looks like this, okay? PC1, okay? The Phillips curve examines the inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. At low unemployment rates, inflation is high. At high unemployment rates, inflation is low, right? So how does that work? Well, we can think about it in a couple different ways, but understand that as inflation is rising, generally speaking, things are doing well because we are moving the RGDP to the right. And when RGDP moves to the right, your unemployment is low, right? And when inflation is low, you're thinking you're going back on the AS curve and your RGDP is decreasing. When your RGDP is decreasing, that means generally unemployment is high. And this is normally to do with the short-term idea, right? So this is PC, this is Phillips curve in the short run, okay? So how does it look in the long run? How does the Phillips curve look in the long run? Before I get into that, I just want to make sure that you understand how the AS actually shifts the PC. So what happens when I have a supply shock, right? Supply shock, okay? Basically known as supply shifts, whatever you want to call it. So I have a supply shock, and basically what is happening is that AS is decreasing. If the AS is decreasing, okay? If AS is decreasing, Phillips curve moves to the right. Okay, Phillips curve moves to the right. If AS is increasing, Phillips curve moves to the left. Okay, so if AS is increasing, let me write that down. If AS is increasing, okay, Phillips curve moves to the left. Moves left. If AS is decreasing, Phillips curve, in the short run, guys, moves to the right. Okay, so that's something that you guys probably want to know. All right, so that being said, let's talk about the long run Phillips curve. Okay, I'll move to my right over here. Now we can talk about Phillips curve. And the Phillips curve actually kind of looks like the long run aggregate supply. And what do I mean by this? Well, first let's graph it. Okay, we have, as usual, we have unemployment rate. As a percent, of course. And then we have inflation rate, right, on the y-axis. As a percent as well. Now, remember, Phillips curve in the short run kind of is downward sloping, looks like that, right, PC in the short run, okay? Now, I said that the LRAS and the Phillips curve in the long run kind of look the same, which means that they're a vertical line. Okay, this is PC LR. Okay, this basically says that since the aggregate supply in the long run is fixed, we believe that the relationship between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate is vertical as well. Now, when you graph, you remember the natural rate of unemployment in the SRAS and LRAS curves. When you graph the LRAS, it's actually at the natural rate of unemployment. So similarly, this is supposed to be at 4% or whatever it is. It's debatable, right, what the natural rate of unemployment is. But let's say it's between 4 to 6%. Phillips curve is the same thing. So when you have a Phillips curve in the long run, 4 to 6%, it's a vertical line. That means the relationship between unemployment rate and inflation rate, this line is completely inelastic. Okay, it's inelastic. All right, that being said, we talked a little bit more about Phillips curve shifts and how various things shift on a Phillips curve. But understand that if I am on a Phillips curve, right, and let's call this point A, right? And what just happened is that the inflation rate has gone up. Okay, inflation rate has gone up. So actually, what just happened is that we moved to another point here. Okay, and my inflation rate just went up. All right, then what tends to happen is that the government says, well, the inflation rate is high. If inflation is high, we need to battle that because rising prices tend to mean that we as people, when we make our money, it's not worth as much anymore. So governments need to step in and need to understand that we need to battle inflation. But before that, what we need to do is let's say we shift the 80 up. Okay, so what happens if 80 goes up? As a result of G going up, let's say. Okay, so government spending went up, 80 went up. If 80 went up, right, the interest rate at 3%, okay, actually goes up. All right, if that goes up, okay, the 3% was just an example, right? If that goes up, interest rates go up, profits go up. Why do profits go up? Because basically, excuse me, because basically money is being flown into companies and they get to make bigger profits, right? Basically saying that as profits go up, right, your employment goes up and unemployment goes down. All right. If the rate of inflation, remember this rate of inflation is going up. This is not interest rates, excuse me. This is inflation rate, okay? Inflation rate, okay? If inflation rates are going up, why do the profits go up, okay? I'm sorry, I said interest rates before. I just want to correct it. It's inflation rates. Why do when inflation rates go up, profits go up? Well, understand that if inflation rate is going up, I as a firm can charge more money to you, right? If I'm selling cameras to you, I can charge more money from the same camera, right? So my costs haven't changed. My inflation rate has changed faster at a faster rate. So what that tends to mean is I make bigger profits. When I make bigger profits, employment goes up. If my employment goes up, what happens is that your PC curve actually moves to the right. Okay? It moves to the right. And you're back at the PC curve in the long run. Okay? We'll call this PC2 and this PC1. Okay? So because of this increased amount of profits, right, your PC curve moves to the right, and all of a sudden we're back at the long run for the Phillips curve. All right, so that being said, we covered a couple of things. Next topic we're going to cover is expansionary fiscal policy. Talk a little bit more about how if the government spends money, we shift the 80 to the right. We talked about this a little bit already, but the specifics of it, terms such as crowding out effect, are going to play a big part in the next lesson. For now, I want to just review real quick about what we went over for the past 20 minutes or so. We talked about supply shocks, okay? Supply shocks are events that cause the AS to move, okay? We talked about that. We talked about shifting AD. What shifts AD? Well, let's say the government spends money. That shifts the AD. So if C, IG, or XN, X minus M, excuse me, move, that means your AD moves, all right? If your AD moves, then pretty much you're facing either almost always a higher price level and a higher GDP. Now, zone 1, you don't get as much as a bigger price level as you do our GDP. And zone 3, you get a bigger price level and a smaller GDP change. So understand SRA is split into 3 different zones. Understand that when you shift AS, you have different consequences, including lower price levels and higher RGDP, which is great, or higher price levels and lower RGDP, which is absolutely terrible. Okay, so with that being said, I want you guys to do me a flow chart for the homework question. Give me a flow chart on how AD and AS, if they move up, actually just up, don't do down because down is the exact opposite. So if AD goes up, what happens to my RGDP, unemployment rate, and price level? And then if my AS goes up, what happens to my RGDP, unemployment rate, and price level? All right, so give me those 2, and I will see you guys back in the next class, and we'll talk about expansionary fiscal policy. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you guys soon.